My guest here on the Broadcasters Podcast on this episode is an Emmy award-winning television producer based in New York City, a media trainer and strategist, author of 2 books, most recently just published this past month. It's a book called Listful Living, a list-making journey to a less stressed you. I'm here with Paula Rizzo. Paula, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat and see where this goes.
Absolutely. So what I want to go and ask you about is, first of all, you worked, and I want to talk about the book. We'll do that very shortly, but I want to go and take a mention about what you've done in the world of reporting for television news and cable news thereafter. Now, you worked a lot on TV news and print media-based media in New York City. You've done a lot of work in the area of health reporting. Now, you worked at some pretty big stations, WPIX, WCBS, WLNY, just to name where you've been at. And then you advanced yourself to the pinnacle of cable news. You worked at Fox News Channel as a senior health producer, and you covered cutting-edge medical breakthroughs, the latest fitness crazes, everything in between. So talk to me about the experience that you had being just, I know it's so much to ask to talk about 16 years of work you've done in broadcast media and what brought you here, the change of the environment, and then you decided to change and get out of there. Talk to me about what prompted it.
Yeah, I have loved working in TV news for as long as I have in New York. I was fortunate enough to start my career working in local news here in New York in several stations, as you mentioned, and then worked my way up to, I was started as a writer and worked my way up to producer. And then I spent over a decade as a senior health producer at Fox News Channel, which was, totally different game when you're doing national news. And at the time when I went over to Fox News, I worked on the website. So I worked on digital, and that was a totally different thing. And when I went there, it was sometimes it was difficult to book guests because people didn't totally understand what it meant to have segments live on the website. They were used to people, being on TV and then taking those clips and putting them on the website. They weren't used to original content for the web. So in the beginning, it was a lot of education of some of our guests to be able to say, no, this is better. This is even better sometimes than TV because it's always here. So I've been fortunate to be able to sort of, go back and forth between digital and TV and all of that and see the big progression and the change. I mean, when I first started, we were using tapes. There was no digital libraries for videos and that kind of thing. So it's been a big change in that amount of time.
Now, if I remember being a broadcaster myself, I only worked in a local outlet here in West Palm, but the one thing was also to make mention of is I don't know, when I looked at your LinkedIn profile and I looked back at your career, you started off in the number 1 market. Is that correct?
I did. Yeah. I actually started working at a small TV station on Long Island first. So that wasn't New York City, but close enough. And I started there when I was in college. It was I would go to my senior year of college. I would go to school, go to class. And then at night I would go and I was a writer for the 11 p.m. newscast. And so I did that, almost for a year. In my last year of school, and then from there, then I creeped into the city a little bit. I worked at WPIX, and I was there for a while. Went to WCBS, and then from there onward. But I was able to. I started freelance, and just kind of like showing up whenever anybody needed you, and holidays, weekends, nights, raising my hand and showing up, and being able to really get to be part of that world.
But now, because here's the interesting part. I mean, there are those that are aspiring to be in probably in television news or just in digital media in general. And the fact that you were able to go from just outside that number 1 market to get in, because there are so many people out there that are working in smaller markets, say like a Panama City or, somewhere in Alabama, something like that. Mm-hmm. And they're working their way up the ladder to get themselves where they are. Sometimes they find stations like down here in South Florida. We have a number of stations that are what I always call, almost say like they're what's the word I'm looking for? The stepping stone, if you will.
Sure.
It's always the next thing that will platform them up to the next spot. So like Miami's always a hot market for it, LA obviously, and you just find ways where certain people will just find themselves to a bigger market, but they have to take the ladder and go rung by rung up the ladder. Talk to me what it was that you did. Was it something where you felt like you had to go in internally, work other areas that you had, or was it just a different skill set? When you got into WPIX and then WCBS, what is it that you did to get yourself into that area and then make yourself be noticed right away from being an earlier market like you were, like WLNY?
Yeah, I mean, you do really just have to be the one who is who is quicker, faster, there before everybody else. Be very eager to be able to show up. I do think that because I was super organized and because I was able to be productive and that kind of thing, I do think that helped me to stand out as well. But for sure, not only just being in the right places and all of that, but I really worked very, very hard at being a good writer. I think that if especially for a producer, that was one of the things that someone told me very early on in my career. To be a great producer, you have to be a great writer. And so I really worked as much as I possibly could. I went to speak to some of my colleagues to ask for feedback on my writing. And I just really wanted to know how to be better. And I think that they saw that initiative and they saw that I wanted to be part of the team and I wanted to be there. But it started as freelance, so it wasn't a full-time thing. And I kind of worked my way up from there.
Now, the other thing too that I'll notice if I'm going through the timeline right, I'm not sure how things were on the setup there was in TV news at that time, but early 2000s, I remember working in this business. They were already moved from Betacam to the DVC tapes or to the digital video tapes, which were
Mm-hmm.
not that good and very expensive. So whatever content you had to go and put together, it was still that matter. We were still in a linear build, not a
Tape to tape.
nonlinear
Yeah.
way like it was today.
Right.
So just to get the chance to do that and then really create some good content that you could put with a lot of transitions, segues, put a lot of other things into it, and also turn it around quickly. Then you had the digital component where I started seeing people coming in to start writing for the website that they started to build up, because before apps, the website was the place to go. So a lot of effort was being put into it, like a newspaper where you'd have several people in a newsroom specifically working on digital, working on putting videos up, which took a long time to, render and put up. Talk to me
Mm-hmm.
about when you worked in that, obviously you worked in that department as well. Talk to me about the change that you saw, you saw all that technology change overnight.
Oh, for sure. I mean, from one newsroom to the next, they were, working into a different system. So when I first went to work for WPIX, they had just started to make the switch to digital. So we
Yeah.
still had tapes. A lot of the stuff that we did was still on tape, but then we had the backup that we were running it on digital just in case we had a
Hmm.
tape, just in case. It was like the whole thing. What if it fails? And we don't
Exactly.
know. And it was interesting too, because there were a lot of glitches. There was stuff that happened. I remember one time there was a newscast we were doing that the whole playlist was brought down because we used
Oh,
a percent sign and we put it in
oh,
somewhere in the rundown. Like, how would you have ever known that? It just was a
right.
weird glitch. But thankfully, we had those tapes, and so we were like, run the tapes. Our whole thing went down. But it's just a learning curve for sure. But the other thing too that I remember from that time was that there was a push towards, because we had now this digital database where everybody could be editing from the same video clip at the same time, which was like unheard of. You would be fighting people for the same tape. They would also, a lot of the writers were then editing short clips, right? Short
Yeah.
voiceovers or whatever it was. And that created a whole other, thing with the unions and how writers shouldn't be editing. And then the editors had issues with it. Like, it was a whole very
Right.
strange minefield at the time.
Well, because I remember at that point, the other thing too was that where I was at, it was a Hearst Corporation managed station, not owned and operated. So there was
Mm-hmm.
only so much budget that went around. And the one thing I kept noticing is that, and as much like it is in radio and other outlets now, in media, you have to have a skill set. You have to be a utility player. You need to be able to edit your own videos or edit your own clips and put it
Sure.
together, as opposed to relying on the camera person to do it for you. And
Mm-hmm.
is to make being a reporter be valuable, still to have something more to it than just somebody behind a stick asking questions and getting the facts.
Right.
That's one thing I always felt like was very interesting, that that's what changed. And then it's already hard enough to kind of keep a budget together for any news outlet to make sure you have enough people out there to cover all the stories that are going on and get some of the stories that you want to talk about when you're talking about health, because I can only imagine
Mm-hmm.
how much time is being given to them. I mean, obviously, whatever it bleeds, it leads. So you have to have the murders, the rapes, the crimes, all that has to be at the
Sure.
beginning. What time's left of the sports and weather for a health check? And that's what it
Mm-hmm.
comes down to.
Yeah,
Now,
for sure.
so I want to ask about this. This is really want to get into the crux of it, because when I have somebody that's just with so much experience in journalism as yourself, how digital has come in and has really just put a tailspin into the news industry. Foreignpolicy.com recently wrote a story about what's titled "The Internet Broke the News Industry and Can Fix It Too." And I thought they put a lot of good things on there. I want to take a few things that I want to quote here for those out there so they can hear, because I think there's a good direction about this, and I think we can definitely have a good conversation on this. Now, first off, they mentioned that, quote, when pollsters ask Americans whether they trust the news they read, listen to, and watch, the answer is increasingly negative. The sentiment is, in fact, now common all over the world. Growing rates of global internet access have made countless sources of information readily available, but with few checks and balances and widely varying levels of credibility. I don't know about you, but I know I've had other people on the show complaining that you see stories that go out that are, with typos and grammatical errors. I see it all the time. So you could tell certain things have to get retracted too much or do not get done correct. So accountability is not there. Now, unprecedented access to all kinds of media has not only increased competition among news providers, it's also led to the extreme proliferation of low-quality yet plausible-looking sources of information, make it easier for political players, if you will, to manipulate public opinion and to do so while denigrating established news brands. I don't want to talk about politics. I'm completely apolitical when it comes to this, but we have to just point out there is things like bias, and there are things where the op-ed section of news is overtaking the actual facts-based portion. Now, given the direction, Paula, that news reporting and journalism in general has taken to becoming sensationalistic and being filled with clickbait headlines, how do you see the state of journalism, how it's evolved to where less consumers go, now they're going to social media or YouTube to get their information than as opposed to going to the stories? It's as if their peers need to validate a news story before they read it.
Right, right. And the difficulty too is that most people are not looking at things with an eye towards, understanding, is that a credible news source? It's just that they see it, they see the headline, and they think, oh, okay, that must be true. They're not even reading all of the whole article to see how many typos there are in that article. So a lot of this has to do with education too, right? To be an informed consumer, to be able to say, hey, you know what? I've never even heard of that website before. Maybe that's not actually true. So I know there's a lot that's being done, like on Facebook, they're doing something with factchecker.org, I think, where, when somebody will pop something up that's actually not true, there'll be something under it. It'll say, actually, check your facts. That's not actually true, which is amazing. But it is really difficult, even for trained eyes, to see what's an advertisement versus not, to be able to see, is this earned media or is this an ad? Even for us, I mean, we know this stuff, and sometimes you can sort of be duped into thinking that, oh, this is the best possible thing. It's like, wait a minute, this is an ad. This is not even real.
Right. No, and the worst part is, a lot of times I feel like I need to go, when I look for a story that I've read about from somewhere. So obviously, okay, social media, somewhere, Twitter, Facebook, a story is brought up. I'm like, okay, I want to read more about it. But I'm going to at least have to go to 3, 4, 5 stories in order to be able to go and read the actual facts of the story and to get more context. Nobody wants to put out context. Radio will never give you that. Television will really not give you that. And the other problem is, when I look at certain stories, I can't go to the TV anymore and watch. I can't watch cable news anymore. There's nothing there for me. If I want opinion, there's loads of it. But what if I want facts? Sure. I can't find it. The only thing I could probably find is if they cover a story and it's covered live so that it's raw and all the context you need is there, or it's a news story that's breaking and you can see the pictures, you can see what's going on in the field. That's all I can trust the news for on television if I want to watch it on a mainstream outlet. And that is completely wrong.
I've started to use some of these like curated news sources because there is so much going on in the world that I do want to know about. And, now that I'm not working full-time in a newsroom, it's not my job anymore to be on top of every single story, but I can't get rid of the news bug. You know what I mean? It's like I wake up in the morning, I'm reading a bunch of newspapers and I'm like, this is too much. This is not actually my job anymore, And so what I've started to do is, I do read things like The Skim. I don't know if you've ever subscribed to that, but it's a great quick way to look at the news. And it was started by NBC producers who, just want to give you like a snapshot of what the news actually means for the day, right? Like, so they'll give you a story. It'll be a quick, paragraph on it. And then they do have in-depth coverage on it if you want to read more about what's happening in Syria or you want to read more about this or that. So it's an informed place where you can get bite-sized journalism. And so I really like that. I read that every morning, called the Skim. And then the other thing that I've been starting to follow is it's a hashtag, but it's also a movement. It's called News Not Noise, which was started by Jessica Yellen, who was a White House correspondent for a long time, I believe, with ABC. And she's not doing that anymore, but now she's running basically her Instagram to be able to give people what they need to actually know with no spin. This is the journalism, this is the story, this is what it is. And so I find that using both of those sources to be able to go and say, okay, I know I'm just give me the facts here, just give me the headline, just give me the bullet points of what I need to know. It makes it a lot easier because you're not getting that opinion in there, which does creep into a lot of news sources now.
So interesting. Yeah, the skim I'm going to definitely look at. The other one I've also learned about was allsides.com, which also is supposed to be just devoid of media bias altogether. And I've also heard when you talk about the sources that are out there, they're fact checkers. I've also heard of NewsGuard. It's supposed to be another place that validates news outlets when you're trying to read news, so you can make sure that. But yeah, I think that, obviously that is if I had to go and do something to make money out of the journalism business, I'll be putting that out there to make sure that people are out there actually curating the right stories so that, I think there are some cases we're getting good stories that are putting out there, interesting stories. But again, everybody has some kind of an agenda. What I also want to get into next, before I get back to that foreign policy article, it was a question, because you were in Fox News, I do not want to bring up any of the stuff that was being talked about, with Roger Ailes and that all this Me Too movement stuff. I have no interest in it. But what I do see and I want to bring up is the fact that there's a lot of content being put out to talk about the newsroom and to talk about people like Roger Ailes and other figures that are out there. So we have the movie Bombshell that's coming out, which, obviously you might know some of the things they might depict in this movie and how much of a real story or true story that's being depicted here anyway, because you might have worked with all those people in that same newsroom yourself. Then there's The Loudest Voice on Showtime. And most recently, we had Jeff Daniels hosting The Newsroom on HBO as a dramatical series. Do you feel like politics and political bias from content like this, portraying the news business, is really hurting journalism ultimately, to point out the fact, really just to the point where facts-based news reporting is it might not ever be relevant to any other mainstream outlet?
I don't know about that, but it's a difficult, strange time in the news business, and it's really, really is. And, even when the Newsroom came out, which was the HBO, that was several years ago, even since that came out, things have been so changed, right? I remember watching that show and thinking, some of it was accurate, but some of it I was like shaking my fist at the TV saying like, that would never happen in a newsroom,
Exactly.
So, some of this is done to, for the dramatics of it, of course, and to get people interested and sort of, these are characters now that it's interesting because they've been behind the scenes for so long that now they're in the forefront and people now know these names, they're household names, and typically these types of producers and people, nobody would even know their names, but it's just kind of interesting how different things have been and how these characters are sort of in the forefront now and people are really interested in it.
The bottom line is all this content can be out there. It'll never be network. I'm just saying, Albert Finney, love it. I can always watch that movie. I'm as mad as hell about this, and I'm not going to take it anymore. Just saying, seriously.
It was a classic, yes.
It was. Howard Beale. We should have more Howard Beales. Honestly, someone like that would be a real breath of fresh air once again. That's just my opinion. And no, you're right. When it coming to saying, I have a little bit almost a dystopian feeling about mainstream news not being able to go ahead and find its credibility again. I just feel like it's taken such a hit. That's just my own opinion.
So, but I don't believe it though. Yes, it's taken a huge hit, but I don't know. There's part of me that just, I love the news business. I love journalism.
Right.
I feel like it's gotta come back. It's gotta make its comeback because there are still really great people who are working in this industry.
Oh, no,
I've always thought of working in journalism and newsrooms as public service because we were there to inform the public and to tell people what was going on, are they safe? Are they, what could they do to live their lives better?
Yeah.
And so I think if there were more people who kind of looked at it in that way again, it would be a little bit better.
I think we just need to get to a period where there's some of this malfeasance that's in the industry needs to get purged. And hopefully that's going to be what happens someday, so that some of those people that are running these news outlets, they're going to say, listen, we can still do the right thing and bring in ratings and revenue. So let's change this and go back to maybe what Cronkite and Murrow and all these other people we cherish and herald today. We can get back to that kind of reporting again. Now, I want to get back to the start article from Foreign Policy. The quote, the world's new digital and highly competitive media environment has created fundamental problems in the business models that journalism relies on. Print products are in terminal decline. Television audiences are plummeting. Advertising around news is no longer attractive when internet giants like Google, Facebook, and Amazon offer far more effective ways to target consumers. These new financial realities have led many news organizations to adopt programmatic techniques for survival, prioritizing quantity over quality and running these clickbait headlines. Each of these developments, caused with a lack of transparency within news organizations and the increased use of unfiltered social media platforms as news sources, contributes to a further drop in trust in the media. So, Paula, where do you as a journalist feel about the change of where to work, where the kind of information that you would be interested in? So if you wanted to get yourself back in there, or you wanted to consult someone that you do for your media coaching, do you prefer that we rely on one outlet to be the end all be all? Can we still have that? And where would you direct, aspiring content creators or journalists to go to in this day and age of journalism?
Yeah, it is difficult because there's so many things that are advertisements, right? We talked about this a little bit before. It's driven by who's paying the most money, not who's the best expert for this, or what's the best actual source. So that gets very muddy, and I do think a lot of it has to be, what are you in alignment with? Some people are great marketers, and so if that's what you want to do, you want to be a marketer, do that. But that should be different from journalism. It just should be. And I know it's kind of blurred a little bit and not exactly that, but there's some podcast companies that I think are doing this really, really well. There's one called Gimlet Media, which I've listened to a lot of their podcasts. I don't know if you have, but they do have like an advertising arm to their whole thing, where they have, some podcasts that are branded, right? So, whatever company will pay for that, but they're very, very clear about it. Exactly what the deal is. The difference between the shows. I think they've done it really, really well. So that's a really, good place to sort of look to see how it can be done in a way that's really transparent.
So we've been hearing a lot of issues as well, where digital media is not becoming the place to go to anymore because there are a lot of companies that are starting to fall apart. I just heard we have certain organizations where Gizmodo, a lot of consolidation of news companies, and then some companies are just trying to drop off. They're laying off people. It's happening too much, and there's no other place to go for it. So I'm just saying to myself, can you still? Is it something where just today now, Sports Illustrated is talking about having new layoffs as well. More newspapers are. There's a story now about how 1 of 4 American newspapers laying off people as they continue to grapple with declining revenue amid the rise of online news. And digital media layoffs are becoming commonplace. So for you to be a journalist and to profit from it and actually have a career that you can really enjoy like you used to, while keeping the credibility that you have, your reputation, the accountability that you expect, it's not there so much anymore. I mean, if you had to look into it now, would you even look to do anything in digital media at this point that was associated with a company that you don't know where they're going to be in a couple of years?
Hey, that's difficult to say, right? I mean, because it is sad to see some of these big giant, news organizations, or let's say, magazines. You would think, oh, that's never going to go under. Those are and one after the next. You just keep hearing about, all of that kind of going under. But if I, right now that the OTT world, over the top as far as like streaming services, I mean, that's the thing to get into. That was a thing to get into 3 years ago, because now it's sort of like hitting its peak. But I think that people really need to not be jaded. If you're looking to get into the journalism business, look, like I said, it's there are ways around it. Look at all of these other outlets that we even mentioned, like the Skin and Jessica Yellen. and all sides to be able to have a different take on it. You know, we have the technology, we have all the stuff that you could use to make it better. I mean, the thing that sort of made things worse is what will save it, to the point of that article, really.
I'm just reading, like, just every day I read certain things that are coming up where Family Circle magazine's been around for what, over 50 years, is going to shut down at the end of the year. You
Yeah.
have, BuzzFeed that's getting layoffs. You see, there's a company I just saw in New York now. What is it? AM New York. It's a tabloid magazine. They're getting the layoffs, but now they have new owners. All this is happening, and so much is just changing. I'm just afraid for people that are good journalists out there, where can they work and how can they make themselves a career and sustain that for themselves? It concerns me a lot. Moving along, they also now wrote that, quote, in this foreign policy article, once again, it's titled, "The Internet Broke the News Industry and Can't Fix It Too." Now, they said that, quote, "The decline of news organizations may seem unstoppable, but while the internet has permanently disrupted traditional media, it also presents ways to fix it." So here we go. Silver lining. Social media can bring local communities back into journalism, boosting transparency, accountability, accuracy, and quality. Harnessing the reach of the internet can help neutralize bias in this industry and fix problems relating to lack of representation and diversity. Information providers can achieve these advances in a financially viable way, making readers direct participants and stakeholders. But to do all this, however, journalism must adapt to the era of connectivity and information. What do you say about that?
Well, it is. I mean, it opens the world up, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's an amazing thing. You even think to, like, when there's something happening in the world, like a tragedy or something, and people are able to communicate right away with each other and see and know, I'm going to go down that block or not because there's a fire there, or whatever. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, people are able to show what's happening in their world. And I was even thinking, as you were talking about it too, like, all of the places that were not media outlets are now media outlets. Like, for instance, like the police department, they've become their own media outlet, because if they're tweeting about an incident that's happening or something that's going on, they're media too. So it's kind of opened everything up where people are able to be journalists even on the street, and sometimes people are not trained as we were to be able to know, like, this is an actual fact or not. So that really opens things up. But I do think it's wonderful because you can have much more reach that way.
And one of the other things I also think about is the fact of, it's like you said right there. I mean, there was a time where professionals were doing all the investigative journalism out there, and there was
Mm-hmm.
people that would go, and obviously the beat reporters are out there, but those have all been swallowed up because the money's not there to go ahead and sustain any kind of a local outlet. Which I've talked with other guests. Normally, Nicole Jordan was a guest on our program, who works in PR and works a lot when it comes to advocating for citizen journalists. We're not getting some of that, but we're hoping to see more where we can see changes. And because I think working together, I think that's where that connectivity comes in. When there are stories that are out there that we need to learn about, that if we can't get people that can dig the story, but there are those that are coming to us as journalists and can tell us what stories are out there and say, okay, then try to find out what you can get for us. It's almost like, like the police officers asking for this
Mm-hmm.
informant to go ahead and wear a wire and get this information for us, throw on a hidden
Right.
camera, if you will. Do you
Mm-hmm.
think that's something that might be more the trend, that could be a trend?
That's interesting. Well, as you're talking about, beat reporters and things like that, like when I first started at Fox, every single affiliate station had a health reporter.
Yeah.
And we would share stories with them. They would share, they would send their stories. We would send our stories. And towards the end, when I left, there were none left. We were the
Jeez.
source. We were the ones. So it was all the stuff that we were pumping out of our department that we were giving back to all the affiliates, because they no longer had those beat reporters anymore. And a lot of times it was like, a doctor or an RN or something, highly qualified people who knew a lot about the subject. And, it makes it difficult because you don't have that specialized coverage anymore. It is much more, everybody does everything. And that's a big change. That's a huge change. Even like the one-man band mentality, that was not how it was in New York. I know in some of the smaller markets, that's how it goes. Everybody's shooting their own stuff, editing it, writing it. But that's not what it was like in New York. And it's sort of moved in that direction through the years.
And one of the things I've been noticing too is that there's a couple of different newspapers that are out there that are now working with other foundations to get crowdfunding for other organizations, nonprofits, to do the investigative journalism for them. So there's a story from earlier this year.
Huh.
Seattle Times working with the Seattle Foundation, raising millions for its investigative work. The Miami Herald now launching a new journalism lab that will host the largest team of investigative reporters to expose corruption, identity fraud, reveal exploitation, while covering solutions to impact the quality and life of South Florida residents. But it is a fund that you have. It's a fund that are trying to raise $1.5 million for the next 3 years to fund this lab. So that's where it's coming from next is again, citizen journalism, but it's also, that's where I see that tie into what the story says about connectivity and being able to just get people together to, interact and be part of reporting the news, connectivity and information.
Yeah, it's interesting though. I mean, I love that there's still the interest.
And that's a story actually I want to get more into with another guest. I'm going to try to find a guest that will talk more about that, about seeing where the citizens are coming in. They're funding in for these outlets, because if they're not going to trust the mainstream to do it for us, then there will be grassroots efforts that are out there that are doing great work, by the way. But, they have to be able to go and get that money to get there. So if the money's not going to advertising dollars to these mainstream outlets, and there might be a competition somewhere down the line, a decade or two, where these crowd-funded, nonprofit-supported outlets are out there that are doing the yeoman's work of news, maybe that's the place to go. But it's not necessarily profitable to journalists, but it will be something that will still do the job that some of those outlets that have the means and resources might not want to do because they have other agendas in mind. Now, another thing from this same article I was mentioning, now, for all their flaws, quote, however, social media platforms contain important solutions to declining levels of trust in the news industry. Emerging media have dramatically expanded the global audience of news consumers, and information providers should see that reach not as a problem, but as an opportunity. The global online community, if properly harnessed, can increase accountability in news organizations by identifying biases and improving neutrality reporting. Having the oversight of countless diverse online users can be beneficial. Investigative journalism by citizen journalists could be happening to go after the journalists. And that's where I've been seeing some of that as well. We're seeing some of the stories being talked about. I mean, regardless of the political biases out there, we shouldn't have to have journalists policing other journalists for what they're doing. Do you kind of see that kind of happening a lot? And is that a good thing?
Well, I think people are much more open to jump out and say something now. Whereas in the past, it was sort of like, well, that must be true. People are much more like leery a little bit, like, maybe I should check that out. That doesn't sound right. People are going with their gut a little bit more to say, let me see what that actually is. I mean, so that's a good thing, but I think people sort of overuse it. Then everyone says becomes, fodder for people to jump all over, which is not great.
Totally.
Sometimes it's not, and it's not justified a lot of the time. But, I do love the fact that people do feel more open and feel like, hey, we have a say in this too, or we should be voicing our opinion as well.
Exactly. So you got through the big hurdle there, Paula. I talked about all the journalism stuff that you were doing, which you, in some ways, in shape or form, you're still working on, because you're an author and you're a consultant and you're an expert and you're a speaker. So you're still in somewhat entrenched into what you started into, a couple of decades ago. Now, let's go ahead and go to current point. One of the things you have now that make available, which you worked with your friend and business partner, Terry Trespicios, I said that right, hopefully. You decided to create an online course. Thank you. I appreciate it. So now she's a former senior magazine editor, branding strategist, and speaker, and together you created a 6-week experience for anyone who wants to get and keep media attention called Lights, Camera, Expert. Talk to me a little bit about the course and what does it entail?
Yeah, well, for me as a journalist, working in TV news, it always broke my heart when there were experts who had a really good story, or they had something there, but because they couldn't deliver camera, or maybe their pitch wasn't perfect, we couldn't go with them because there wasn't enough time to coach them. There wasn't enough time to get them up to speed, especially at the network level. And so when I went out on my own, it was one of the big things that I really wanted to do was to be able to empower experts, whether it be an author or a doctor or whoever, to be able to effectively pitch media and understand from behind the scenes why we say yes and why we say no. And it may not be the reason that you think, it could literally be because the actor doesn't want to do that segment anymore. And that's it, there's some things you just wouldn't know unless you were in a newsroom. And so I wanted to sort of uncover that for people and really help them to come up with good story ideas and ways to work with the media that's not scary. A lot of times people, a lot of the experts I was working with, they just feel like, oh no, people get picked out of thin air to be on TV. And it's like, sometimes that's true, but a lot of times we're pitched. You tell us that you exist, and then that's how we know, you're a great expert. You're able to give us information that we wouldn't have had otherwise. And so, to just kind of like peel back the curtain a little bit on that. And, the course does go through basically the behind the scenes in the newsroom, and then TV and radio and podcasts and that kind of thing. And then also, what makes a great pitch? How can you pitch better? How can you create then content that makes the media want to continue to use you as an expert? And this is all stuff that I've used for myself because I've been on both sides of this, not only as a journalist and someone who is the one saying yes or no to pitches, but as an author myself, I'm out there as well all the time doing media, and I'm always pitching my ideas, and I'm always thinking, oh gosh, is this going to be interesting? So I understand what it's like,
Absolutely. My thing too is when I look at all this, I say to myself, there's going to be openings out there, I think, in the future that network TV is starting to lose its spot, because I think, when it comes to the programming that's out there, there's only so many talk shows that are going to do well. And I think at some point, the network television is going to find a way where they're going to say to themselves, you know what, we can't sustain the kind of programming and keep coming in at a bit of a loss when we can't compete with the over-the-top outlets. When you're going to see now Disney Plus coming into play and Apple TV now putting a big push in their content. And same thing with Peacock. All these other networks are going to be coming in. So as soon as somebody's bundling all those together, network TV will take a major hit, bigger than ever before. It's already done it now. I mean, you don't even have shows that make 20 million viewers for any particular show unless it's live or something that might be sports or some kind of awards content. That's just going away. So I'm saying to myself, when I've talked to other television producers on the program, one of the things I've talked about was the fact, or the discussion was made with, maybe that content, that time is going to go back to the stations. And maybe then they're not going to be just put into a segment of a news program. They might just get a standalone program that might be produced by the station. So they might get back to putting their own content together and putting it on the primetime lineup or in access programming. Because I know in access right now, there's not a lot of shows like Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy they're going to stay around anymore, or Entertainment Tonight or Access Hollywood. Something's going to have to fill that spot. So if it's dependent upon the local outlet to do it, and they can obviously put together content that looks just as good. They already have the staffing and the resources. They might just go back to that. Would you think so?
I always find it so sort of heartbreaking every time there's like a new talk show that comes up, and I'm always thinking like, oh gosh, here we go again. It's another one that's going to last one season. I feel so bad, and that's what happens. Like, that's just the way it goes. And
now,
it's
Kelly
totally,
Clarkson,
and I hope that they do well, but typically it's not the way it goes. It's everybody wants to be the next Oprah, and that's just like never going to happen again.
No.
So
no, Meredith Vieira, one and gone. Katie Couric, one and gone. Harry Connick, one and gone. That's what it is. And sometimes I don't even really recognize they're on. But, you can't do, first of all, TV's changed so much. They don't want to do game shows anymore daytime, which sucks. And that's too bad. Then you have, say, the talk shows that are out there that are supposed to be like the real fun base. Like Ellen has cut to the mix. Rachel Ray's cut to the mix.
Yeah,
otherwise, the tabloid shows can't come out there anymore because the reality shows have taken that bit of salaciousness away. So someone like Jerry Springer is no longer relevant to be out there. And Maury Povich is just hanging on because, you can do the same 4 shows every day, and that's pretty much it. Good for him. Good on him.
Right. So. It is very hard, though, too, because, as you know, to get somebody to tune in at a specific time for something, we're so now used to not having to do that. Oh, we'll catch it on the replay. We'll see it later. Well, I already know what the news of the day is because I saw it on Twitter, so people are not like tuning in at that time for particular things. The competition is really fierce.
And I just think that this is where you offer the TV news, the local news, that going to come back in. One of my favorite stations, and I don't get to see it that much, but there's something to be said about Channel 7 in Miami, WSVN. I don't know if you get a chance to watch them, or if you've heard the reputation of them, but I think they put in like, what, 10, 12 hours of news content live every day. It's
Wow.
great. Well, I think WHDH in Boston is the same way. It's just that group
Mm-hmm.
Sunbeam that runs those stations. Because they're Fox outlets, and they just say, well, you're not going to run certain programming, and they only have so much. I mean, I remember back in the day, you used to run, older programming. So
Mm-hmm.
20 years ago when I was in college, or 25 years ago now, you would see rerun programming of like cop shows, like Streets of San Francisco or Hawaii
Sure.
Five-0, things like that. Instead, then the judges shows came out, and that became the trend, put them on in the afternoon to replace all of that. But then it didn't matter because they just needed something to be running there until there was breaking news, and then these stations would just come in, and people
Could
would just
break
stay to
in,
those
yeah.
channels, and the news content carries that channel, and that's what it is now. And it's caused the other stations to do the same thing. More news in the afternoon, more in the morning, and take over some of the slots that could be taken by a network. And I just think maybe we're going to see more of that, because it's more dependent on the local channels to make content, because the networks can't do it, and they can't compete as well anymore than what you have with this on-demand, dynamic that we have now. Then I think
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to have those people that are going to have weekly shows or daily shows that people just come back to. I think some of those
But
shows
it
just
is
might
a
die out and not get replaced.
It is difficult though for local newsrooms though, as you know. I mean, they are pulling stuff together by the skin of their teeth sometimes. They're short
Totally.
staffed, there's people doing every job. I remember that being the case even in New York sometimes. It's like we got things on the air because we knew we had to. There's three of your writers called out sick. It doesn't matter. You're still going to get the
Oh,
show on the air. It's still going to happen. And we did it every single night. It always happened.
yeah. But you have a bigger audience that people really don't talk about. In New York, if I'm on a
True.
JetBlue flight, your channels are the ones that are being focused on every market around the world. On any JetBlue flight, you're watching local New York programming, or if you're looking through, say, like there's some other outlets that might just feature the network programming. The default programming is going to be the New York affiliate in most cases. So
Right.
there's a bigger audience outside of the demographic that you already have.
True.
And
That's
that's
a
why
good
people
point.
always look at, why do people just pick up from New York, say from Fox 5, and go right to Fox National or to the Fox News channel? That's what happens. It's because
Mm-hmm.
that's another thing that needs to be done, is that, those cable news outlets, whatever they're doing, they're always going to cherry pick from their own outlets, and they're going to see that the more exposure, the more time they're on there, the more content they're putting together. I think the news needs to be the revenue stream that will really carry every TV station out there, because the programming is, I don't know if it's going to do enough to do that. That's where I'm coming
Yeah.
from with that. Now, one thing before we wrap things up, of course, we have to talk about the book. It's just getting released
Mm-hmm.
now. It's called Listful Living, a list-making journey to a less stressed you. So there's self-help books out there. I've been reading a number of them myself. Well, I listen to them on Audible all the time. Um, First of all, is the book available as an audio book right now?
It
And
is, yes, and I'm the narrator, so you'll
oh,
hear my voice.
great.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
got to go pick it up. I definitely got to do that. Now, for the best way for me to go ahead and ask you about the book is, I want to take a Q&A that you did with Forbes.com. And
Sure.
just to give this as an example, they asked you about how lists go beyond remembering what to buy at the market or tasks to tackle throughout the day. You said this, quote, writing something down really solidifies the goal and makes it more attainable. A study at Dominican University of California found once you put pen to paper on a goal, you're 33% more likely to actually achieve it. Not only do you become more motivated, but you're reminded of your goal and become more accountable too. To-do lists will make you more efficient in getting stuff done for the day, but a goal or life list will set your real dreams in motion. Sketching out where you'd like your life to go on paper is a smart exercise, because it really makes you think about where you are currently and where you would like to go, end quote. Take me behind how you wanted to tackle this book and how it applies to your own time management and what you thought people needed to know about so they can be better, worthy of their time.
Yeah, I mean, people who work in newsrooms know better than anybody else that time is of the essence, right? I
Yes.
mean, deadlines are coming and they're
Deadlines.
going to show
Yeah.
up and you've got to be ready. And so
Hmm.
it's really with that mentality and that training that I wrote the first book, Listful Thinking, which came out about 5 years ago. And
Yeah.
that was really how was I able to be so productive and how was I able to win an Emmy Award? How was I able to stand out? Like to your point, we were talking in the beginning, like how were we able to stand out in newsrooms? Because I was more organized than everybody else, because I was getting stuff done faster. Because I had lists, because I had learned how to really manage time, how long 30 seconds is, how long a minute
Yeah.
is. I knew how much I could fit into that time. And most people don't think in seconds like that.
No.
And
No.
so people need to really know and understand that timing yourself when you do certain tasks is really helpful. Being able to know exactly how much stuff can you fit into a day. It's like a rundown of a newsroom, a newscast.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of how I've looked at all of this. And then the second book, Listful Living, is a journal. So it's meant for you to write in and for you to really look at your life and look at the first part is looking at yourself as like a journalist and saying, okay, where am I right now with my stress levels? Where am I with my productivity? The second part is where do you want to be? What would be the best possible scenario? And then the last part is how do we put it all together and make sure that you get stuff done, but you're not overwhelmed and burnt out.
Exactly. And I'll tell you one thing, I'll close this out here. So when it comes to time management for me, when I worked in radio behind a board, or when I worked in television and I could see the clocks on
Yep.
the cameras, the board and the forward operators had to go and, direct people on the set. Always needed a clock that says hour, minutes, seconds. I can't just see
Yes.
hour and minutes. I have to see seconds. Even on my computer here, as I record with you at my full-time job where I do internet radio and podcasting, I must have hours, minutes, seconds. I have to be that in tune to what my clock is and what my deadlines are. So
Mm-hmm.
it's something that I come up to. But I definitely want to check out your book, and I want to recommend listeners to also look for the book. Obviously, it's on Amazon. I saw it's there. I'll make sure to link to the Amazon description or the Amazon link so that everybody can go and get their hands on a copy of the book. Again, it's Listful Living, a making journey to a less stressed you. And I know your website is paularizzo.com, PaulaRizzo.com. And social media, how can people reach out to you?
It's all under List Producer.
Okay.
That's another website that I have where I have all of my list making stuff. So it's listproducer.com, where I have information and productivity tips.
Fantastic. Paula Rizzo, again, I'm so thankful for you to be on the show, and I thank you for taking time to talk to me here on the show. And I think you do some fascinating work. I think you've had some great experience, and you're so well spoken, articulate. And it's too bad we don't see you on TV so much these days. You don't say for like a big news outlet out there, but obviously, I liked the fact you did change directions when you did, and you said to yourself, you wanted to go a different direction, and you've been very successful at it. So that
Yeah,
entrepreneurial
it's been a
spirit,
lot of fun.
you
Mm.
grabbed it and you made a lot out of it. So thank you again for sharing your experience with us, and I'm so glad to have you on. We
Thanks
hope
for
we
having
can
me.
keep in touch. My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Okay.